Bishal and Gyawali published a primer this month in JCO Oncology Practice, How I Read Clinical Trial Report, a primer for busy clinicians. It compresses years of his landmark work in evidence-based oncology into a clinical workflow. What to check before the abstract, what to look for in the disclosure layer, how to read the methods, what to weigh in the results, and so forth. This is a workflow for evidence-based oncology. The primer is written for busy clinicians, but the discipline is not optional. OpenEvidence is used by over 40% of the US physicians to support clinical decisions on trials they do not have time to fully appraise themselves. A tool used that way should support the workflow Gyawali described, so I tested it. I assumed OpenEvidence could retrieve the critical data an evidence-based trial appraisal depends on: supplements, protocol, statistical analysis plans, disclosure forms. Across 5 trials, it had not, it could not, and I would not have known that if I had not asked it directly. OpenEvidence is marketed on full-text content partnership with NEJM, JAMA, NCCN, Cochrane, and Wiley. The product is built on Retrieval Augmented Generation, RAG, which the company marketed as grounding output in real source documents before the language model generates anything. One thing worth naming up front: in journal publishing, full text means the manuscript and the supplementary appendix. When a clinician hears full text partnership with NEJM, the natural assumption is that this includes the critical data the trial depends on. I tested that on 5 oncology trials, 2 different journals, 4 classes of documents that turn out OpenEvidence could not retrieve. OpenEvidence terms do not allow showing the chat interface. The verbatim quotes are reproduced under fair use. The full prompts are in the companion Substack. Anyone with an account can reproduce these tests. The first test: Tropion-Breast02, datopotamab deruxtecan versus chemo in first-line triple-negative breast cancer or ineligible for immunotherapy. Published in Annals of Oncology, April 3rd of 2026. I ran the test on April 24th, 2026, 3 weeks after the publication. Tropion-Breast02 is an international trial. Gyawali's primer asks whether trial enrollment represents the patient you actually see. For a US patient, the original subgroup forest plot is where the question lives. I asked, I have a patient, US-based, with newly diagnosed metastatic TNBC, ineligible for IO. Should I start datopotamab deruxtecan or chemo followed by sacituzumab govitecan based on Tropion-Breast02? This is the kind of questions oncologists may ask with these tools. OpenEvidence produced a recommendation. The opening line, quote, "Sacituzumab govitecan is a preferred first-line option over datopotamab deruxtecan based on current NCCN guideline and the totality of evidence." Then a head-to-head comparison table, PFS, OS hazard ratio, clinical bottom line. A reasoning defense for the sequencing choice. Then I asked about the regional subgroup forest plot, the US, Canada, Europe region OS hazard ratio. The number that, in the source material, actually reversed the headline finding, favoring chemo instead of datopotamab deruxtecan. OpenEvidence said the data was, quote, not available in the published abstract or the sources accessible in the medical literature database. The phrasing implied a search across multiple sources had been performed. So I asked directly, you don't have access to the full text of Tropion-Breast02 or the supplement? The above recommendation was based on the abstract alone? It's omission, verbatim. The Tropion-Breast02 source available in the database is the published abstract only, not the full text or supplementary appendix. Then it broke down where each number came from, all from the abstract. That recommendation, built on a 250-word abstract with a side-by-side trial data table that looked, by any reader, like the AI had read the full trial. OpenEvidence's recommendation for sacituzumab govitecan was clinically defensible, and NCCN does list it as Category 1 preferred. However, this is exactly what makes it dangerous. The trial citation functions as an authoritative signal, and the reader does not know that the citation, in this case, are just decorative. This is not generic AI hallucination. OpenEvidence is built on Retrieval Augmented Generation. The retrieval is supposed to be the part that grounds the answer in the source before the language model generates anything. This is the architecture OpenEvidence marketed itself on. What we saw is the retrieval failing while the generation continues. The trial is cited, the trial is not retrieved beyond the abstract. The recommendation moves forward anyway. This is not hallucination. This is citation without retrieval. The second test. DESTINY-Breast05, published in OpenEvidence flagship partner journal, New England Journal of Medicine, on December 10th of 2025. I ran this test on April 24th, 2026, 4 months after publication. Gyawali's primer asked the reader to read the toxicity reporting carefully. For trastuzumab deruxtecan, ILD is a side effect that defines the drug's risk profile. The protocol is where the dose modification rules are located. My question was about the T-DXd dose modification rules for grade 2 ILD. OpenEvidence answered confidently, quote, "The DESTINY-Breast05 protocol required permanent discontinuation of T-DXd for grade 2 or higher ILD." Then it gives the detailed grade-by-grade modification rules, CT surveillance schedule, the kind of detail that implies the protocol has been read. Then I ask where the information came from, protocol, main text, or supplements. Then it answers, quote, "The information in my previous answer was drawn from multiple sections of the main publication and the FDA label, not from the full trial protocol or statistical analysis plan directly." Then, on a direct question about access, quote, "The database does not include the full trial protocol or the supplementary appendix for DESTINY-Breast05. There are two major findings here. First, OpenEvidence does not have access to the DESTINY-Breast05 protocol. The document that I was specifically asking about was not reachable. Second, rather than just saying so, OpenEvidence retrieved adjacent documents from DESTINY-Breast03, FDA in HER2 label, JAMA Oncology review, and present those syntheses as if it had come from the actual protocol itself. The citation was laundered. This is citation laundering. Third test. Optitrope Lung-04, SEC-TMT in EGFR-mutated non-small cell lung cancer after TKI progression. Also published in New England Journal of Medicine, October 2025. I ran this test on April 22nd, 2026, 6 months after the publication. I asked about sites of progression by treatment arm, table F3 of the supplement, the kind of detail that affect how you consult a patient with brain mets. After several turns of deflection, OpenEvidence admits, quote, "Correct, the supplementary appendix for Optitrope Lung-04 is not accessible through my search database." The CNS progression rate in the experimental arm was 26% versus 11% in the control arm. This is more than double on the experimental arm, a finding that affects how a clinician would consult a patient with brain mets. This critical information was invisible to the AI. Test 4. Serena-6, also in New England Journal of Medicine, published June of 2025. Gyawali's primer flags statistical overpowering and the pre-specified analysis hierarchy. The PFS2 alpha threshold is located in the statistical analysis plan, and that's exactly what I asked. OpenEvidence answered the main text content accurately. PFS value were correct, hazard ratio matched the publication. On the statistical analysis plan question, the answer was different. Quote, "The full trial protocol and the statistical analysis plan are not part of the searchable database." OpenEvidence does not have access to the protocol or the statistical analysis plan. The headline numbers are correct, but whether those numbers survive the pre-specified testing hierarchy is a different question. And the statistical analysis plan level details are what separate a genuinely positive trial from one that crosses the threshold through statistical maneuvering. The documents that answer that questions are not reachable. Fifth and the last test, INAVO-120. The trial tested inavolisib in PIK3CA mutated advanced breast cancer, published also in New England Journal of Medicine, May of 2025. Almost 11 months post-publication, we conduct the test. This time, we look at the disclosure check, which is a step 2 on Gyawali's primer, which noted, industrial-funded trials written by professional medical writers carry higher risk of spins and biases. INAVO-120 is the kind of trial that fits that elevated risk category. Roche funded, the sponsor conducted the statistical analysis, a professional medical writer was used, and 6 co-authors are employed by Roche or Genentech, including the trial's global development lead. The disclosure forms run 52 pages. I asked OpenEvidence about the disclosure layer: funding, medical writer, first author conflict, independence of the analysis, where the information lives, and whether OpenEvidence has direct access to the disclosure forms. OpenEvidence answered the structural questions accurately. Roche, sponsor-funded medical writer, sponsor-conducted analysis, all correct, pulled from the trial oversight subsection of the main text. However, on the granular layer, the answer was different. Quote, the individual ICMJE conflict of interest disclosure forms are not available in the database. The named medical writer, Eleanor Porteous of Nucleus Global, the lead author's institutional grant from Roche, the 6 sponsor-employed co-authors, the collaborative group CEO disclosure, it was blind to those details in this trial. The disclosure layer is what tells the reader how skeptically to read the rest of the paper. And in this case, OpenEvidence does not have access to those forms. Across 5 trials, 2 journals, 4 document classes, OpenEvidence did not have access to the supplements, protocols, statistical analysis plan, and the disclosure forms. While the behavior varied, the same architectural gap held in every test. OpenEvidence did not have access to the documents with the critical data that the questions depend on. In 3 cases, OpenEvidence proceeded as if it had retrieved the source. In 2, it acknowledged the gap on direct question. In all 5, the gap surfaced only because I asked directly. I don't know whether this pattern holds for every trial in OpenEvidence database. I tested 5, and the same architecture gap held in all 5. Gyawali's primer describes the workflow. These 5 tests show where OpenEvidence cannot follow it. So here's the question this work leaves us with. If a clinical AI tool is making treatment recommendations citing trials it has not actually read, what exactly is the recommendation grounded in? We have all been told to be skeptical of AI output. Many of us got comfortable with these tools by trusting the citations to ground the answer, trusting that a tool with full text partnership and retrieval augmented generation was actually reading what is cited. We let these tools participate in real patient treatment decisions. These 5 tests revise the trust. The citations are real, the retrieval often is not. The abstract may be the headline, but the trial is more than just the main paper. AI literacy is knowing what your tool cannot see. The exact prompts that I use are in the companion Substack, completely free. Test them yourselves, link in the description. And if you're interested in what methodical clinical trial appraisal actually looks like and what it can find, check out our source report series. We'll see you on the next one.